I still remember the exact moment Kyle Patterson told me I would never be successful. It was 2 months before our breakup, the night I showed him my first draft of a branding concept I'd been quietly working on for weeks. He took one glance at it, snorted, and told me I was adorably naive for thinking anyone in the industry would take me seriously. His laugh echoed in my head for days, stretching into weeks, burning its way into my confidence like acid. Even now, a year later, sometimes I still hear that laugh when I'm trying to fall asleep. My apartment smelled faintly of coffee and acrylic paint that first morning I tried to start over. The space was small, barely enough room for a bed, a desk, and the thrift store easel I refused to leave behind, but it felt like mine in a way nothing ever had when I lived with Kyle. I stood by the window, watching sunlight pour across my desk, and tried to convince myself this was the beginning of something. But the truth was that my chest still ached in places I didn't know heartbreak could reach. Moving on was one thing. Unlearning the poison he'd fed me for years was another. At work, I was a junior graphic designer at Rowan & Marks, a local ad agency that felt like a circus held together with duct tape and too many coffee runs. The office buzzed with frantic energy, phones ringing, designers arguing about color palettes, interns clutching iced lattes like they were emotional support beverages. I felt invisible most days, quietly working on client logos while the senior designers got all the credit. Still, there was something comforting about being surrounded by people who lived and breathed art, even if my role was small. It made the dream feel less impossible, like success was something I could reach if I just kept moving forward. During lunch breaks, I found myself sketching ideas for a national beauty brand's open design contest, something Rowan & Marks wasn't participating in. The prize was massive. A feature campaign, a contract, and a guaranteed salary jump big enough to drag me far away from the financial quicksand I'd been stuck in since the breakup. But every time I sketched something that actually looked promising, Kyle's voice crept back in. "You're trying too hard to be someone you're not, Lena," he used to say, usually while scrolling through his phone and pretending not to watch my reaction. I shook the memory off each time, but it lingered more than I wanted to admit. A week later, I ran into Kyle in the most inconvenient place possible, the grocery store frozen aisle. He grinned when he saw me, this smug, knowing smirk that made my stomach twist. "Wow," he said, pretending to look impressed. "Still doing that little design thing?" His voice dripped with condescension, as if my entire career were a hobby I would eventually grow out of. I forced a smile and kept my tone even, but inside I could feel the old cracks widening. He stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was sharing a secret. "You know," he murmured, "some people just aren't meant to stand out. And that's okay. You're the reliable type. Background material." His words hit harder than I wanted them to, even after everything. I left without buying anything, my hands shaking so badly I dropped my keys twice before I got into my car. That's the thing about emotional wounds, they don't heal cleanly. They reopen the moment someone points at the scar. Back at home, I stared at the blank tablet screen on my desk, trying to remind myself that Kyle's words didn't hold the same power they once did. But doubt lodged itself in my throat like a stone. I wanted to design something beautiful, something worthy, but the fear of failing, of proving him right, made my fingers tremble. After a long moment, I closed my eyes, took a shaky breath, and forced myself to start sketching again. The first lines were messy, hesitant, but they were mine. Over the next few days, I found myself falling into a slow rhythm work, sketching, sleep, repeat. I refined the concept piece by piece, letting instinct guide me instead of fear. The campaign idea slowly came alive. Bold colors, striking minimalism, a celebration of individuality. It felt like everything I wished someone had told me when I was growing up, everything I never heard from Kyle, and in a strange way, creating it felt like stitching myself back together. Submitting the design felt both thrilling and nauseating. My finger hovered over the upload button for a full minute before I clicked it, heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear anything else. The moment it went through, I sat back, exhaling a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. It was done. No matter what happened next, I had taken the step Kyle always swore I was too weak to take. But deep down, buried beneath the fear and the exhaustion, a quiet spark flickered to life, something small but undeniably real. And I had no idea that spark was about to become a wildfire. The following week at Rowan and Mark's began like any other chaotic Monday. Only this time I felt a strange mix of restlessness and anticipation humming beneath my skin. I kept checking my email, pretending I wasn't waiting for news about the contest even though it consumed every spare thought I had. My coworkers buzzed around me, arguing about font choices and client budgets, but their voices felt distant, like background noise in a movie I wasn't fully a part of. Every time my inbox refreshed and nothing appeared, a dull ache of disappointment tightened inside my chest. Still, I forced myself to keep working, trying to bury the anxiety under layers of productivity. By midweek, my routine began unraveling. I found myself distracted during meetings, tapping my pen against my notebook and earning a few annoyed glances from Emma, our lead project manager. She was the type of person who lived for color-coded spreadsheets and perfectly timed schedules, and my sudden inability to focus clearly rubbed her the wrong way. She even pulled me aside afterward, asking if something personal was interfering with my performance. I wanted to laugh, because if she knew the truth that I was terrified, my one chance at proving myself had already passed, she'd probably slap a sticky note labeled emotional overload on my forehead. But instead, I apologized and promised to refocus, even though my thoughts remained scattered. Everything changed on Thursday afternoon when I stepped away from my desk to refill my water bottle. When I returned, I noticed a small crowd gathered around my computer, whispering and staring at something on my screen with wide eyes. My stomach dropped as I rushed over, fearing some humiliating email had popped up or that someone had accidentally opened a personal file. But when I pushed through the group, my breath hitched at the sight glowing on the monitor. It was an email. The email. Congratulations, Lena Torres. That was the first line. My hand flew to my mouth as I kept reading, my pulse thundering in my ears. They loved my design. They wanted to feature it in the national campaign. They wanted me, my work, my vision, my name front and center in a project that would be seen across the country. For a moment, I couldn't hear anything around me except the echo of my heartbeat, racing so fast it blurred my thoughts. I had to read the message twice just to believe it wasn't some elaborate prank. When I finally looked up, the faces around me were a mix of surprise, envy, and genuine excitement. Emma blinked at me like she couldn't believe what she was seeing, then offered a stiff but sincere congratulations. A few of the junior designers squealed and hugged me, nearly knocking me into my chair. Even my supervisor, Mark, who rarely acknowledged my existence unless something was wrong, appeared at my side with a raised eyebrow and a slow nod of approval. For the first time since joining the company, I felt seen, really seen, as someone with actual creative worth. But the moment I stepped outside the building for lunch, reality hit me even harder. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages from the contest organizers requesting meetings, contracts, and design revisions. They wanted to discuss presenting me as one of the campaign's primary creative voices, a role I had never imagined for myself, not even on my most optimistic days. I walked down the street feeling weightless, dizzy with disbelief, and a little nauseous from excitement. Somehow, in a world where Kyle had convinced me I would always be an afterthought, I was suddenly becoming someone people sought out for talent. Later that evening, I told my best friend, Priya, over takeout in my apartment. She screamed so loudly I was certain the walls shook, then forced me to replay every detail of the email at least 3 times. We talked for hours, sprawled out on my tiny couch with half-eaten noodles on the coffee table and my laptop open between us. I expected to feel relieved, maybe even content. But instead, I felt something sharper, something that tasted like vindication. Because this success wasn't just a victory for my career. It was a direct contradiction to everything Kyle had ever tried to make me believe. Still, beneath the triumph, a part of me feared what would happen next. Success came with visibility, and visibility came with consequences, public attention, company politics, and the undeniable possibility that Kyle might eventually find out. The thought made my hands shake again, But this time, the emotion swirling in my chest wasn't insecurity. It was determination. I had earned this, and deep in my bones, I could feel the shift beginning. Something bigger was coming, something that would drag my old life straight into the path of my new one. The Monday after my design was officially approved by the campaign team, I arrived at work with my nerves buzzing like static under my skin. It felt strange walking into the office knowing my life had already begun shifting in ways no one around me fully understood. The campaign director, Camille, had emailed late Sunday night requesting a video call first thing in the morning. I barely slept, replaying every possibility in my mind. Was there a problem, a revision, a delay? My stomach churned with a mix of dread and awe, like I was balancing on the edge of some invisible cliff. When the video call began, Camille appeared with a grin so wide it made the screen look brighter. She didn't mince words or drag out suspense. She dove straight into it, explaining that the brand wanted me to serve not just as a designer but as a featured face of the campaign. I stared at her, stunned, trying to process what she meant by featured. She clicked a file and a mock-up loaded, showing my design in vibrant colors behind my own face, smiling, confident, and blown up at the size of a skyscraper. My breath caught as she explained they were offering me a place on a marketing billboard in the middle of the city. I felt my heart crawl up into my throat and stay there. After the call ended, I sat alone in the conference room, gripping the edge of the table as the weight of the opportunity sank into me. My image, my actual face, would be displayed in one of the busiest intersections downtown. Thousands of people would see it. My mom, my coworkers, strangers, and, inevitably, one very specific person who had once looked me dead in the eye and told me I would never amount to anything because I lacked presence. I swallowed hard, realizing the universe had just handed me the most poetic form of proof imaginable. But the quieter realization that came afterward surprised me even more. I didn't want to do this out of spite. At least, not entirely. A part of me needed to reclaim every part of myself I'd shrunk for years. My confidence, my voice, my creative identity. And yet, buried deep beneath all that empowerment, there was a thread of nervousness tugging at me. Stepping into the spotlight meant stepping out of hiding, and I wasn't sure I was ready for the world to see me in such a literal larger-than-life way. When I returned to my desk, I tried to act normal, even though my hands trembled as they hovered over the keyboard. Word must have spread faster than wildfire, because several coworkers kept glancing at me with curious expressions that made my anxiety spike. Emma eventually approached. Her typical sharp tone softened into something resembling respect. She asked if the news was true, and when I nodded, she surprised me with a small smile. For someone who thrived on structure over creativity, she seemed genuinely proud that one of her designers was making such a leap. Later that afternoon, during a staff meeting, Mark couldn't contain the announcement any longer. He cleared his throat dramatically and told the room that one of our own, Lena Torres, has been selected as a featured creative talent in a major national campaign. Half the room clapped, a few looked confused, and a handful exchanged glances tinged with jealousy. My cheeks burned as Mark continued, overemphasizing the company's role in developing my abilities. Conveniently ignoring the way he'd barely noticed me before my rise began, I nodded politely. But inside, I felt a flare of independence that tasted sweeter than any praise he could offer. That night, I called my mom and told her everything. She burst into tears so quickly I barely got 3 words out before she started sobbing. Growing up, she'd always believed in my artistic ability, even when Kyle had mocked it relentlessly. Hearing her voice crack with pride made my own eyes sting. She kept saying, "I always knew, Mija. I always knew." And for a moment, I let myself feel the full warmth of her love settle around me. But after we hung up, silence filled my apartment with an unsettling heaviness. I kept picturing the Billboard mock-up, my face glowing above the city lights. The thought made my pulse race in a way that wasn't entirely good or bad, just intense. And in that quiet moment, staring at my reflection in the darkened window, I realized I wasn't afraid of failing anymore. I was afraid of succeeding in a way that might pull ghosts from my past back into the present. The week leading up to the official campaign launch felt like wading through a fog of adrenaline and dread. Each day brought new meetings, stylist fittings, and video shoots. And even though I tried to keep myself grounded, everything felt surreal. I kept waiting for something to go wrong, some twist that would yank the opportunity away at the last second. Camille reassured me repeatedly that the brand was thrilled with my work and my presence, but old insecurities clung to me like stubborn shadows. Still, underneath all that fear, something stronger was taking root: pride. On Thursday, the campaign team invited me to a private media preview event where the billboard would be unveiled before going public the next morning. Walking into the venue felt like stepping into a different universe. Photographers shuffled around adjusting lights, executives mingled near the stage, and someone handed me a champagne glass before I even had time to breathe. I tried to keep my hands from trembling as I scanned the enormous cloth-covered structure in the center of the room. All I could think was, my face is under that thing. As I stood near the back of the crowd waiting for the unveiling to begin, I sensed someone staring at me. Not the casual glance of strangers curious about a new face, but something sharper, almost intrusive. My chest tightened as I turned around, and for a split second I thought I was imagining it. But there he was, Kyle, my ex. The man who once told me I was a decorative placeholder in his life, standing only 10 feet away in the middle of a corporate event he had absolutely no business being at. He looked different than I remembered, stressed, thinner, maybe even a little desperate, but the shock of seeing him sucked the air out of my lungs. My first instinct was to hide behind one of the promotional displays, but it was too late. His eyes locked onto mine, widening with something between disbelief and panic. I felt my stomach flip violently as he started walking toward me. The room suddenly felt smaller, the light too bright, and the hum of voices too loud to think straight. When he reached me, he tried to smile, but the expression twitched uncertainly across his face. He asked what I was doing there, as though I had somehow wandered into a restricted event by mistake. His tone carried that old, familiar condescension, the same one he used whenever he wanted to shrink me down to something manageable. I forced myself to breathe slowly, trying to steady the tremor in my voice as I told him I was part of the campaign. The disbelief on his face would have offended me once. Now it almost amused me. Before Kyle had a chance to interrogate me further, Camille spotted us and hurried over with the enthusiasm of a proud mentor. She introduced herself to him, explaining loudly, perhaps too loudly, that I was their featured designer and creative talent. She spoke about my work with such confidence that even I felt like I was hearing about someone else. Kyle's expression curdled into something dark and conflicted, and for a moment he couldn't come up with a single word. Watching him flounder filled me with a strange, quiet satisfaction. But I barely had time to absorb the moment before a staff member called everyone's attention to announce the unveiling. My heartbeat thundered in my ears as the cloth slowly lifted, revealing the massive billboard in all its glory. My design exploded across the screen, vibrant and alive. And right there in the center was my own face, smiling, confident, radiant in a way I hadn't seen myself in years. The crowd erupted into applause, and somewhere in the chaos, Camille grabbed my hand, beaming with pride. I glanced at Kyle, who stared at the billboard like it had personally betrayed him. His jaw twitched, his eyes darting between the display and me, as though trying to piece together how the person he dismissed so easily had ended up the centerpiece of something so monumental. For a second, his expression faltered into something that looked almost like regret, but I refused to let myself feel anything for it. Not pity, not empathy, not nostalgia, nothing. What I didn't expect, though, was what happened next. A reporter approached Camille to request an interview with the face of the campaign. And when she gestured toward me, Kyle's posture stiffened sharply. He stepped forward slightly, as if he might interrupt, as if he still had the right to influence my path. His voice cracked when he said my name, softer this time, almost pleading. In that moment, I realized something with startling clarity. This wasn't just about a billboard. This was about a door closing permanently right in front of him. The interview began only minutes after the unveiling, but my thoughts stayed fixed on Kyle's shaken expression lingering in the background. The reporter asked about my journey, my design philosophy, and what it felt like to be featured so prominently. I answered as steadily as I could, still riding the strange mixture of nerves and exhilaration pulsing under my skin. When the reporter congratulated me and moved on, a wave of relief washed through me. But it didn't last long, because the moment I stepped away from the cameras, Kyle was waiting, like a storm cloud blocking the exit. He approached quietly this time, without the usual arrogance that used to tighten my chest. His voice came out low, almost strained, as he asked if we could talk somewhere private. For a moment, I considered refusing outright, but something in his expression, a flicker of desperation, made me hesitate. Not because I cared about comforting him, but because I finally recognized the shift in power, and part of me needed to see it through to the end. I nodded, but only enough to allow a conversation by the far wall, still in public view. When we stopped near a small display of campaign merchandise, Kyle exhaled shakily, as though trying to steady his thoughts. He admitted he hadn't expected to see me here, which made me almost laugh considering the scale of the event. Then he confessed he had been struggling lately. Things at his job were falling apart, promotions weren't happening, and he'd been dealing with financial issues he never mentioned when we were together. His voice trembled on the edges, and I could see he wanted sympathy. But all I felt was a distant, cool detachment, a clarity that I'd never accessed while we were dating. He said seeing my billboard felt surreal, like he had misjudged me. The understatement was so absurd it made my jaw clench. I told him calmly that he hadn't misjudged me, he had dismissed me. He had underestimated me, ignored my ambitions, and belittled my dreams until they barely felt real. Kyle swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing, because he knew it was true. And for once, he didn't argue back. When I told him that his opinion no longer mattered to me, a flicker of hurt crossed his face. Not because of love, he had never loved me in a way that wasn't selfish or conditional, but because he could finally see that he no longer had a place in my life. His grasp on me had vanished the moment I reclaimed my confidence, and he realized it too late. He asked if we could start over, maybe just as friends, but I shook my head before he could finish. I wasn't interested in revisiting the past, especially not with someone who had spent years convincing me I had no future. The conversation ended without theatrics, without shouting or dramatic final lines, just a quiet, final closure. Kyle stepped back, his shoulders sagging, and for the first time since the day we met, he looked smaller than me. I turned away, feeling a weight lift from my chest that I didn't realize I'd been carrying. Camille spotted me moments later and wrapped an arm around my shoulders, guiding me back toward the celebration like I'd just completed a marathon. In a way, I had. Later that night, after the event ended, I took a long walk toward the intersection where the billboard would officially go live at midnight. The streets buzzed with weekend energy cars honking, music drifting from open bars, the air warm from the city lights. When I reached the intersection, a small crowd had already gathered, waiting for the screen to switch over to the new campaign cycle. My heart hammered as the clock hit 12. The billboard flickered, then illuminated in full color my design, my smile, my work blazing high above the street. As I stared up at the towering image, an emotion I hadn't expected rose in my throat. It wasn't pride or triumph, even though those feelings pulsed beneath my skin like electricity. It was peace. Peace because I finally understood that success didn't erase the pain. I endured it, transformed it. The billboard wasn't revenge against Kyle. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It was about proving myself right. After years of doubting the person I could become, people stopped to admire the display, pointing it out to their friends, snapping photos. A couple even recognized me and asked for a quick picture. I laughed nervously, overwhelmed but grateful. For once, I didn't shrink under the attention. I stood tall, shoulders back, letting the moment wash over me. And as the brilliant glow of the billboard lit the streets around me, I realized that I wasn't just rising. I had already risen.